All right. Hey, everybody. This is Understanding Iconic Comics. We are going to be addressing some things just based on events that have happened probably within the last week or so that have generated a lot of frenzy about what iconic comics is. There's been some speculation. I'm not going to beat around the bush. Richard C Meyer, who has the channel for, I think it's Comics Matter with your boy Zach, he's actually talked about us on 2 occasions, and for the most part, they were pretty favorable. But I think there's some misconceptions that probably need to be clarified. And before I start, this is a Christmas Eve broadcast, so I just want to say Merry Christmas to people who might be off the grid for a couple of days with loved ones and family. So this is going to be hopefully a perennial broadcast that you can listen to anytime to answer certain questions and refer to it. But with me tonight, I have my friend and fellow creator as part of the Iconic Comics headline teams for Soul Finder. We have Doug Ernst with us.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's no problem. We've had a great year. It's been a banner year. We experienced some record growth. I know between Common America and Soul Finder, it was amazing. We accomplished a lot, probably more than we thought we could within the last 2 and even 3 and 4 years. And so with the growth does come certain challenges and certain conceptions and misconceptions. So we just thought that we would take the time to address some of them. Doug Ernst actually has his own channel for those of you who are new and might not be familiar. If you look at the description for this video, you can actually go to his YouTube channel. His followers are actually much greater than mine, but he provides really good insight into pop culture, a little bit of politics, the creation of independent works, et cetera, and it's very informative. So I encourage everyone who's listening, if you haven't, to check out his channel. Okay, so Doug, you covered some of this stuff just a few nights ago, if I'm not mistaken, but we'll go through it once again just for the sake of clarity. So one of the things I think we need to address, the reason why I decided to do this was because recently we've been receiving a lot of reader feedback, very positive, about people getting Soul Finder books, Common America, Black Ops, and recently Arc Athena. Now, Arc Athena is a book by Eric Canetti, who recently joined with us. And I think he's the first, I guess you would say, like, quote unquote, pro to go with Iconic Comics. And it's not that we're completely anti-pro, even though we kind of joke about it. But the reality is that Iconic Comics was sort of established to help truly independent creators who really don't have any foothold in the mainstream whatsoever or any prior background. But given Eric's pedigree and given kind of his stellar reputation as both an artist and a very professional craftsman, that obviously it was something that the people at Iconic just really couldn't overlook, and we're really happy to have him on board. But there were certain predictions that we had made, both you and I and him, that would happen. And sure enough, they have come to pass. So one of those things is that there are groups of people out there who, for some reason or the other, don't like Doug and I. And these are groups that go way back, and they are kind of amorphous. And part of it is, for example, like Comicsgate. Now, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of debate still, rages on. Like, what is Comicsgate? Who defines it? Yada, yada, yada. And typically, if you talk to the people who have been around long enough, or even the head honchos, the people who kind of head everything, they would say that we're not really part of it, which is fine. I don't ever think that Doug or I have ever espoused any allegiance to any movement. We're kind of very independent. But with that comes this idea of, who do you claim as having certain victories? So one of the things that we said was, hey, Eric, we know that there's certain groups that don't like us. And what you're going to notice in the coming weeks is something unusual. If you play by the handbook that Iconic Comics uses, you are going to get your books out on time, and you are going to show that you can be a professional from the mainstream who goes independent and still is able to get a really good book out on time, ahead of schedule, and present it in a very good quality format with that shows that you've really taken the customer's money and have put it to good use. And you're going to kind of buck the trend of people saying, well, no, quality takes time. It takes time to actually put out a good book. Excuse me if I'm late. That's just par for the course. And I just said, Eric, the thing is this. One thing that's going to happen is you're going to see people and they're going to try and ignore where it's coming from. And they're going to attribute you for the success while completely ignoring what happens with the other people, such as Iconic. For example, taking pictures of just the book, saying, hey, Eric, good book. I'm really glad I got it, while ignoring like the branding and everything like that. Because the elephant in the room is that you're not supposed to acknowledge us, which is fine, but it's kind of just funny because it's predictable. So going back, looking at where Doug and I have come from a few years ago, like 4 years ago, I would say that we were definitely part of a consumer-driven movement. The idea being, and even prior to that, you have people like the shitty webcomics guys with Comics Liberty, which is this idea of the independent comic is a great space. Make what you want and just have it be an equal playing field where everyone kind of competes and is able to get their work out there. And so I think at the time that Doug and I met, there really was this kind of consumer advocate kind of upheaval where the idea was we should really be highlighting and spotlighting what we think is good, that everything should be kind of from the ground as far as feedback is concerned, and that if you're going to be working in corporate comics or have any type of feedback, that the reciprocal nature of it should really pay attention to what the customer wants, and not only that, but treat them with any modicum of respect. But the one thing that we had predicted was at some point, the danger to it is that it would be taken over by professionals. And the professionals would have their own kind of view as to what this should be. And long story short, there were definitely some disagreements in terms of how it should be. But ultimately, we just decided that we're just nothing but independent. We always have been, and we feel like that's where it needs to be. So you ask anyone over the last few years, and they'll tell you that they think that we're independent and we're not part of that group. But the funny thing is that so people were showing Arcathena in recent days and saying like hashtag Comicsgate, like way to go, it's another win for Comicsgate. And Eric Canetti is a very nice man. We've come to know him and love him because he is very professional. He's very studious, and he always watches very carefully with what he says and how he treats people. And just like Doug and I, we have a lot of readers from all corners, and we respect readers, and we don't really care where they're coming from. You could be a communist and read Soul Finder, and as long as you're reading it and giving good feedback, or at least feedback that Doug finds beneficial, he's not going to ostracize you in the same way that I would never ostracize anyone who is like on the right. Our readership comes from all walks of life, and we don't expect everyone to come from the same background. However, the danger is when you're looking at something like saying, oh, this is a victory for my group. Well, the problem with that is that group right now, actually, even though they say no one owns it, there's actually two people who are vying for quote unquote ownership of it. So by attributing the success of Iconic getting books out on time or early at a low price in very good format, typically all of our books are hardcover, and making sure that customers are taken care of and they're not talking down to. These are things that are successes attributed to Iconic. We went fully independent about 2.5 years ago. To attribute our successes to a movement that actually has kind of vying ownership right now is almost de facto attributing it to one of those owners. And I don't think that that's fair to us. Now, if you want to say that our books are living up to your principles, that's fine, because any principle that is in line with ours is good, hopefully, because we would expect that your values you think are actually good and worthy, and we think that our business practices are good and worthy. And if there just happens to be a coincidence between the two, that's good, and we're not disputing that at all. But I do feel like it's fair to distinguish what we do from that of our competitors. It's not fair that people say that we're not part of their movement and then suddenly want to claim us as part of that movement. And people might be saying like, well, who's ever said that, you've been ostracized or that you aren't part of it? Well, we happen to have one of those, and I'm going to play that for you right now. Doug, I don't know what the timestamp on this is, about when was this audio. Was it earlier this year or was it last year?
Yeah, it was definitely this year, but it was months ago. Somebody sent it to me. And that's the other thing is so when big channels go out of their way to essentially make it known that Iconic Comics is the boogeyman or Baba Yaga, you are not allowed to talk about Iconic Comics. It it's kind of irritating then where people vacillate, where particularly with Soul Finder, where it becomes Comicsgate when it's convenient, and then other times it's not considered Comicsgate. And because of my history, it's strange because people consider me quote unquote OG Comicsgate with Captain Cummings and Diversity in Comics, Englentine, guys like that. So I've never shied away from that because I've always considered, like you said, Comicsgate a set of principles. But I always said if it becomes part of a club where there are people that are setting rules, and it's essentially like some sort of wannabe biker gang, that's where it gets weird. And so, like you're saying, there are large channels where you cannot talk about Iconic Comics. And so it's very odd then when other people start claiming that the fulfillment and distribution of iconic books is somehow emblematic of that movement, when I actually know that you have overseen, like particularly with your own books when you were in Texas, like literally packing up iconic books, if I'm not mistaken, like sharing videos of the fulfillment process. So somebody who was demonized by very popular figures within this movement is now like those figures are being attributed with the speedy fulfillment of books, and it's a very strange situation.
Yeah, so I'm going to play this recording. This was an exchange that happened with, I think he's the creator of Sideshow 66. I think it's Matthew Fowler is when this exchange happened. So let's listen to this real quick. This clip is really, really quick, but just listen very carefully. Here we go.
It looks like you're... And I think if you want my other material, I believe my kaiju book, Sideshow 66, the one I did with Matt Weldon, that's for sale on what's Doug Ernst and Tim Lim's website, the Comerica. I don't know. I don't want to promote that. I don't want to. No, I mean, you know, that's Matt's deal. You know, he's selling his back stock there, though. But if people want to buy it, you know, that's.
So a lot of people talk to us. There's a lot of people who really want the same deals with Iconic that we're doing. They kind of see what we've done in the last 2 years. And so they tell us, frankly, they tell us conversations that happen in the back and who's been listening and what they're paying attention to. So we're not going to kid around with ourselves. We just think it's funny because regardless of what they say, we're just doing our own thing. We've been doing our own thing. We've just had to ignore some of the noise. So we're aware of some of the things that have been done and actively telling people not to discuss us. In fact, there's this whole Kickstarter thing where people have been discouraged from going over there. And it's not, they might tell you a reason in public, but privately, they've talked about how it's because they see the model that I did with Mark Pellegrini, as well as others. I'm definitely not the first. You have some people such as like Doug TeNapel, there's Micah S. Miller, there's Preston Poulter. I was encouraged by consumer advocates and customers such as the Comic Book Hut, Shitty Web Comics, Thinking Critical. They've all told us to go to Kickstarter, and we listened to it because it was coming from a consumer standpoint. But there were people behind the scenes saying, well, don't, if you do what Tim Lim does, like that's the end of us. Like, my gosh, like you can't prove him right. So we're aware of it. But the reality is, let's not fool ourselves. Like Doug said, taking credit for our work, I think, is not fair to us because we laid the groundwork. We established the network and the connections that we needed to do to make sure that we could live up to our own principles. And I think that that's really what it comes down to. So there were a couple of people on Twitter recently who received Arc Athena, and I had told Eric and I told Doug, I said, this is what's going to happen. Those books are going to come in, and there's going to be a kind of cognitive dissonance where they're not going to want to even talk about Iconic or even address things like the box or the packaging or everything that comes in it. They're going to want to attribute it to a movement. And so that actually happened this evening. It actually happened the other evening. It's just now that I've had the time to get around to it. And the good thing is that the people who we addressed, they're very polite. One of them actually said, oh, I actually had no idea. I just assumed that you were part of this movement. And it's like, well, you know, if you think that way, I think that's fine. But the reality is, from a legal point of view, or if you want to get into the technical aspects of it, it's not fair to us and it's not fair to you, because we're not claiming ownership of any type or partnership in any type of movement. And on the other hand, that's not a victory that you can claim. This also ties into something that happened with diversity in comics, or Comics Matter with your boy Zach. He did a video recently, which was fairly good and thoughtful. It was actually comparing a lot of comic book community, quote unquote, communities. I really don't like that term, but he said that you have businesses, you have clubs, and you have co-ops. He said a business is like the big two, Marvel and DC, where everything is very structured. There are rules, there's regulations, there's ethics, codes of conduct, things like that, where you actually have a hierarchy. You have clubs where there's essentially, there might be a hierarchy, but there's really no business principle behind it. There's no contract signed or anything like that, but there is membership, whether that membership is by de facto, by self-proclamation, or by people saying that you're part of the club. And then there's co-ops, which is kind of between the two. The idea that you have a certain set of unifying business that you do together and it's contractual, but there's autonomy. So for example, Richard C Meyer says that Iconic is like this co-op. And I think it's a fair example to make, because you have Doug Ernst, he's in charge of Soulfinder, and under his employ, he has quite a number of artists, and then primarily he has Matt Weldon. And then there's us with Common American Black Ops, which is myself and Mark Pellegrini, and the people that we employ. Many artists, we actually employ musicians, animators, but we're all under the Iconic's umbrella. And the Iconic umbrella has its own set of contracts that we have to be obliged to. But that also means that we're all privy to the same benefits of being under Iconic. So for example, if you received Arc Athena, you got this box. The box is the same box that goes out with most of the crowdfunding campaigns. And it's because if you are part of this quote unquote co-op, you're entitled to the equal amount of benefits that are under it. Now, in the same breath, Richard C. Meyer compares us to Comicsgate, and he says Comicsgate is a co-op. And I humbly disagree with that, because as far as I know, unless you're part of one of the major creators' companies, you're essentially just part of a network in which you can claim membership. You use a hashtag, you say you're part of it. But the reality is that they're not all governed by a business contract. They're essentially kind of still working all autonomously around a certain orbit. And so by having him put Iconic with that pedestal, I also don't think it's fair. Granted, we do have we have one book that's a late title, which is Long Harbor by Alejandro. But Alejandro pitched that book to Iconic after the book was done. There was no agreement made a priori. Iconic saw the quality of the book. They knew that it was something that needed to be fulfilled. They thought it would be good for its imprint, and then they decided to put it out. So our track record of getting books out and sticking with the principles of kind of a white glove treatment and this policy, it's all done from a very business point of view. It's done through contractual agreements. It's done through rigorous quality control. And that, I think, distinguishes us in independent comics. There are other people who do it. Don't get me wrong. Doug TenNapel, Brian Polito, these are all very, very skilled people when it comes to just the quality and the presentation of their work. But Richard compares us as a co-op, and he compares, say, Comicsgate to a co-op. I don't think that's fair. In my point of view, I think it's a club. And I don't think it's just me. There's some prominent YouTubers who are considered the kings of that club who call it a club. So don't take my word for it. I'm pretty sure Doug probably has a clip lying around somewhere where it's repeated to many times as a club. So Richard, if you're listening, I think it's a disingenuous comparison to equate the two. And I think I voiced as much in your comment section, saying that I don't think the two are equatable. And I think even Matthew Reese even said in Nebraska, we know how co-ops operate. You have independent agricultural people who agree that they're going to go into a co-op. There's agreement signed, but the essence of it is that each person and each company is able to operate with autonomy. But the uniting factor is contractual and that there is a business that is transpiring within it. So that's where we stand with it. Iconic Comics is independent. We are our own thing. But even within this, we are all autonomous and we all operate individually, but we're all united in terms of what it is that we're trying to do.
Well, yeah, when in regards to Richard's video, the one thing that I thought about immediately, the Comic Book Cut actually has a video on this. So a couple months ago, Clint Stoker had broached the idea of possibly going to Kickstarter. It was just throwing the idea out there. He wasn't saying he was going to go. It was just, I'm looking at the numbers essentially, and it might be good to go to Kickstarter. And there was a stream, I think it was on John Malin's channel, called There Will Be Blood. And he essentially said, do not cross the picket line, the quote unquote picket line. And if you cross the quote unquote picket line, then you won't get his support. Essentially likening Comicsgate to a union with union bosses. And so that to me was saying like, okay, well, you're essentially a union. You have rules, you have leaderships, and the same exact stream talked about quote unquote protection that was offered to people that follow the rules. And so it was essentially saying, do not use Kickstarter. If you use Kickstarter, you will be breaking the picket lines. And so that video of Richard's where he was talking about co-ops and clubs, like you said, it seemed rather odd because Iconic is the one that has a very clear set of standards and contractual obligations for the people that are under its umbrella. Whereas the YouTube online community, it's not so much that. The rules change from day to day, week to week, month to month. And who knows, in 2022, as you were talking about the other day after Richard's one of his videos, they can decide, well, no, you can use Kickstarter now because the rules changed depending on what the bosses say.
Yeah, and I do have a very strong feeling and a strong suspicion that in 2022, I would not be surprised if a lot of the former naysayers jumped ship and all of a sudden decided, hey guys, it's okay to go to Kickstarter. Like everything is fine now. Like you were saying, I mean, a lot of it is fickle and a lot of it really does boil down to kind of where they feel like the wind is blowing. Now, I'm not disparaging or discouraging anyone to go over to a platform where they say, or where they think that they can actually make more money. But I do think that as far as like looking at the principle of the matter, I would be shocked. And I think that the most that could be done is I think some apologies to people like Clint Stoker, if they decide to do that, would be merited simply because, like you said, it was almost like a form of threat to insinuate that if he went there, that there were certain things that he wouldn't have access to. And as far as Iconic is concerned, we don't really operate like that. For example, we still publish books through retail through Antarctic Press. So we actually go at times outside of our contractual agreement to go with other people. And that's fine because we're actually not breaking any contract. And contractually, we own 100% of our intellectual property. There's nuances to that in terms of like what it is that we're supposed to give to Iconic so that obviously as a company, they can stay solvent and also help us out. But for example, you have guys like Alejandro, who's doing very well right now with his NFTs. If tomorrow he decides, well, I'm not going to publish Long Harbor 2 anymore, I'm going to open up my own fulfillment and do it there, that's fine. And there's no hard feelings whatsoever. There's no threats, nothing of that nature. He's completely independent to go there as long as his obligations to Iconic are fulfilled. And like I said, him going to another person, another company, or even opening his own to do fulfillment on his own book is in no violation of that. So there's no threatening. Everything is done fairly cordially in terms of this. We're all friends. We all get along. And I think this will go into kind of the business practices of Iconic so that, again, if people like Richard or his listeners are paying attention, we're actually going to go into a little bit more detail. So here's how Iconic essentially works. One, Doug Ernst is not the president of Iconic. It is a joke that people think for some reason that's major speculation. And I saw someone else say, no, Doug's not the president. It's Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini. I'm pretty sure they own it. That also is not true. We don't own it. The way Iconic worked is this. It's actually a very interesting origin. The only time we've been late on any fulfillment was actually on our first crowdfunder with Chuck Dixon. It was actually his book. He was the writer on it, but we were late by 1 month because our patch manufacturer was late. And so even though we got the books in October and assured in November fulfillment, we couldn't do anything until December. A friend of mine in Texas is an entrepreneur, and he had said, well, what is the current dilemma that's facing independent comics? And I said, you're not going to believe it because I'm going through it right now. And it's the issue of fulfillment. If you can find out how to print and you can budget for that, and then you can get the book miraculously into print, then comes the problem of actually having to mail them out and to do it in a way where you're able to keep track of all of it. So anyway, he had to mail out all these patches because we decided let's mail the books out and then mail the patches out separately. He mailed all of them. We're talking thousands of patches in under 24 hours. And he came back to me. He circled around. He said, so tell me about this fulfillment thing again. Is this really like a problem that's plaguing independent comics? And I said, yeah, guys like me and Doug Ernst, we've talked about this ad nauseum. I mean, you can look. I'm sure Doug has them. I know he did them with Thinking Critical with Wes, where we talk specifically about the pitfalls of independent comics, where we say, if you do not address these issues, you are doomed to fail. And people will not trust crowdfunding as a platform. You have to get this right. It is paramount that you do this correctly, because if you fail and you're a large creator, there's a trickle-down effect where they don't trust us. Because why are they going to trust us, the smaller creator, when the bigger creators can't get their act straight? So this entrepreneur in Texas that we're friends with said, I think we can solve your problem, and I think it'll benefit us both. I've always wanted a comic imprint company. I just needed the talent. And we said, fine, we can get you the talent. We just need the manpower to solve our logistics problem. That's how Iconic was made. So the president chooses to remain anonymous. He's not like Elon Musk or anything. He's just a very humble entrepreneur who likes a whole lot of different business ventures, but he's always been interested in the comics aspect of it because he grew up with them and he loves them. And he likes working with artists and writers and things like that. So our contractual agreement is that we don't screen any of the books that go into the formal applications process. Those all come individually. If he has a question about them, he'll come to guys like Doug and I, but he's under no obligation to hear us out. So if someone pitches a book to him and he comes to Doug and I and we say, no, we really can't vouch for the person. We think that, they're a terrible human being or whatever. That doesn't really have any bearing in the last decision. It's not a democracy in terms of what's chosen. He typically screens the books with us. He'll screen it with at least 3 other people. And in the case of Alejandro, he didn't even screen it with us. I actually didn't find out that Alejandro had joined with us until basically weeks before the fulfillment started. So they obviously do their own thing as far as how they curate works. So we've had some people who are upset because they say, well, I tried to get in with Iconic, but Doug and Tim were gatekeeping me. That's not true. Actually, it's never happened so far. We've never really seen any of the titles that have crossed them, except for the exception of Arc Athena. And that was because I had those talks with Eric Canetti. And Eric Canetti actually flew to meet the head of Iconic just to get, it's like what Doug Ernst calls breaking bread. When you're going to do business with someone for a long term, it seems to be very beneficial to be able to meet a person, to talk to them, to establish a rapport, so that you know them as kind of an honorable and trustworthy person who's going to get the job done. And so far, we've gotten the job done. Behind the scenes, there are some definite nightmare issues that we do not publicize because we don't think it's very professional to do that, to air certain bits of the dirty laundry out there. So there are some very, very high stress situations, especially now during the holidays. Don't get me wrong. A lot of times on social media, it looks like we're working at full steam ahead, but sometimes the gears get jammed and we have to fix them. But that's not really the business of the reader. And it's not something they should be concerned or preoccupied with. So we correct those problems before it goes out there. But that's essentially how it works. And so, like I said, for people who are curious and who have been wanting to ask how essentially we operate, that's it. And I feel like it's better to get this done going into the new year because we have a lot of things that we haven't announced, and we're not going to announce until literally the day before, because we want people to be surprised. And not just that, but we know that people are actively poaching some of our ideas. So for example, we poach some of our ideas, but we credit them. So like Doug TeNapel, I mean, we've said on multiple streams that we took his box idea, but then like you'll have some people who take our box idea and then they'll claim like, oh, this is a victory for us. Like, that's a great idea. And it's like, yeah, but kind of know where he got the idea from, but they're not going to say it, for example. And then same thing with like Doug and I, we have artists that we use, and then we hear that there are certain people who are trying to get our artists away from us. And that's fair, you know, it happens a lot in business, but we know that some of these people do not have our best interest in mind. Some of them actually talk pretty snarkily about us. So we feel like it's only in the protection of our interests that we keep some of this stuff as secret as we can. But going into 2022, we have some stuff that's so cool to announce that basically we're going to do it so that you're taken by surprise and there's no time to prepare for it. It's just the way that we do business. We like a certain degree of surprises that we don't tell anyone or announce, so that readers and people who pay attention to us are both shocked and delighted to see that we have a few tricks still up our sleeves.
Yeah, the running joke about who's president, whether it's me or you or Mark or some combination, it's funny, but at the same time, it's not, because like you said, people, when they really think that, and then they come to us and then they're like, you could pull the strings, you can make this happen, you could bring me into Iconic with my comic, and you're like, no, I can't. And then sometimes you can tell they don't believe you and they get all huffy and then they go away. And you're just like, I wish they didn't believe this, but I could understand on some level why they would, because Iconic is essentially the manifestation of the vision that we had for how to do indie comics right, however many years ago, you know, from like 2018 or whenever we first met. It's like 4 or 5 years ago, and we started talking about all of this, the long-term sort of visions. It's actually playing out in practice now, and because people they want the name, like who's running it. And so since we're on social media and we're spreading the word about it, their mind wants to just latch on to whatever's right in front of them.
Yeah, and I mean, on one hand, it does sound braggy, but what you mentioned is absolutely true. You go back to guys like Englentine, I Love Comics, one channel. So for those of you who don't know, Englentine is the guy who runs I Love Comics, which is a channel on YouTube. Captain Cummings, even like guys like the Comic Book Hut, who we've known for at least 4 years already. The Shitty Webcomics guys, I've known them for about 4.5 years already. We have all essentially been saying the same thing, as far as I think our principles have been very consistent. I think there are some aspects where we might disagree on a very minor level, but I think overall, we think that having a multitude of comics out there of different genres and types is a very healthy thing. It's one thing that, for example, manga has an advantage of, because they're not pigeonholed into just superhero comics. They do a very wide variety of things to satisfy a lot of people. But the one thing that we always said is that there needs to be not just a unified set of principles, but there has to be a way to turn it into an engine of business that we can do that can sustain itself over time. And we have never wavered on that. I mean, for example, when I was working with Chuck Dixon, our books were priced at $25. And we had always said that that was seed money. It was going to be capital, so that one day after we actually made it to a certain point, we would start upgrading quality and reducing price, which is why, for example, our Common America books are $10 for the hardcover. Now, you have a book like Soul Finder where you still pay like $20 for it, but the type of hardback you get for Soul Finder dwarfs Common America by comparison. The Common America hardcover is kind of like the base tier hardcover you can get, whereas, I mean, like Soul Finder, you're almost like teetering on the edge of almost like a leather-bound hardcover. So people who get that book, they see it and they see the intrinsic worth. And we've even gone so far as to make sure to pay out of our own pocket just to make sure that the customer is treated with the utmost respect and gets above and beyond what they've anticipated. I know that, for example, for Demon's Match, for international backers, you basically paid out of your own pocket and just told them, pay what you will when you receive it. When you get it and you like it and you feel like it's worth it, then you can pay me whatever, but here's the receipt in case you want to know. So there are these sacrifices that we've made because we've always felt that the reader should really feel internally that they should invest into it because they truly like the story, they truly like the craft. And I think one place where we do things a little bit differently is, for example, in manga, you have all these different genres and everything like that. But I like the European model because in the European model, they treat the book itself, the physical presentation, which with such love and respect that all the books that they print, typically on a first run basis in France, are very, very well put together. And I think that for people who are quote unquote collectors and they like that type of thing, then I think that that prestige quality, the white glove treatment, is something that a lot of our readers look forward to, even though they're not floppy comics. So there are these things that we have done over the years that we have put a lot of time, a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and capital into. And it's not something that I feel like can be just kind of whimsically thrown into a movement where a lot of its leaders did not want us in there. They actively disagreed with our principles. They actively shunned us, mocked us, kind of made our lives hell. And I'm not talking about necessarily the readers, even though I think some of them were definitely part of that. But, you know, that's okay. Let bygones be bygones. But if we're not going to be part of a group, if we're going to be ostracized from there and persona non grata, then I don't think it's fair that years later we're lumped in with them, especially during kind of very tense legal proceedings where the ownership is actually up for debate. Because if you're lumping us with a group of people where the ownership is attributed to a singular person, I don't want our successes to be with him because his track record of putting out things is not stellar and is not the Iconics way. That's not how we do things. It's actually completely antithetical to their business practices. So I feel like that this is important in terms of how we do things. I think Richard, I know that he emailed me not too long ago, kind of asking me kind of loosely questions about it. And it's like, well, you know, if he wants to find out, he can just email info@iconiccomics.com and see kind of how, what they can do and how they operate and things like that. But I think that everything that we've done so far has been an open book for most people who are paying attention.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And going back to your point, it's years ago, you were the one who, you had your parody books and your satire, and there were individuals that were essentially saying that if you were trying to pull a Jonathan Swift in 2019, that was unacceptable for this particular movement. And so individuals like myself, and I believe Captain Cummings, he could correct me if I'm wrong, were saying like, no, if you're going to have a movement, you could have anime, you could have manga, and you could also have parody, and you could have political parody, and you could have political satire. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you're open and transparent with your customers as to what you're offering them. That's what we're about, is being transparent and not playing weirdo shady games like Marvel, where they say like, okay, we're going to give you a Spider-Man book, but then suddenly Spider-Man is browbeating you to wear masks or something along those lines. So that's what we were against. But then you fast forward in time a couple years later, and you know, suddenly political parodies are okay. They're fine. The people that were called quote unquote traitors and turncoats and all of this a couple years ago for using Kickstarter, well, now we're going to explore using Kickstarter. And so those are the things where, to me, it's just, there's a certain level of hypocrisy. And then to have people essentially giving the fruits of your labors are like all of the success that you have worked so hard for and attributing it to others, it doesn't sit well with me at all.
Yeah, it's infuriating because actually when it comes to people who have kind of come under that pressure the most, honestly, like Mark and I just ducked our heads down for the last 3 years at least and just said, you know, and I've said this ad nauseum, our whole thing was, we're starting from the ground up. It's just you and I now. We have to trust that my art will be good enough with your story so that if we get 100 backers, they'll tell 50 more. And those 50 will tell 50 more. And we're just going to have to see. But we have to trust that over time, if we commit to it, that the work will speak for itself. And that's what we did. And that was even after people still kind of made fun of us and went after us and, you know, kind of wouldn't let the past go away. But even like during your Soul Finder campaign, I mean, we had talked about it and you were like, I would not be surprised if during our campaign, like just weird stuff would happen, just kind of out of the ether. And then you were even like told that you were part of a crazy conspiracy theory. I mean, come on. Like it was some of the most insane things I ever heard. And, you know, in a little bit of Schadenfreude, I don't rejoice in anyone suffering. But the pros who were accusing you of being in a conspiracy, they're gone. Like these are the people who kind of had everything under, they had it served to them like oysters on a platter, and they couldn't even do with what they had in their resources, what we were able to accomplish with Iconic just in the last 2.5 years. And we don't even have the capital or the investors that they do or did, as far as I know. And as far as like, okay, here's what you have to do. Have your timetable. Tell people when your books are going to come out. Don't be late. Get your books out when you promise. Get them out on time. Increase your quality. Be consistent. Be cordial. Don't brag about how you're using the money. Use the money to reinvest. Keep your head down. Keep on working. Get it out. Put your nose to the grindstone. These are things that we've all done. And you've outlasted your critics. And so you, of all people, I think, have kind of gone through that most recently.
Well, here's the interesting thing. You played that clip earlier where Iconic was not allowed to be played on, you know, the pros channels. And the thing is the people that accused me of ridiculous moronic conspiracies to, you know, take out the pros a couple years ago. I was allegedly in a conspiracy with Preston Poulter to take out the pros. Never mind the fact that they were late on their books, but I digress. Anyway, there are people that don't know anything about that. They don't know the history. So when I'm live streaming, they're like, hey, you should work with so-and-so. You should talk with so-and-so. The people that accused me of falsely, erroneously, maliciously of conspiracies. And I never say like, oh, you can't talk about that guy. You can't talk about his book. And so there's a double standard as well in terms of that, where it's Iconic is, we are persona non grata, but when their readers come to our channels, I don't go out of my way to say, don't talk about individuals. I let my viewers have their say, and I say, okay, yeah, check it out if, you know, whatever. And I go out of my way to not cause problems with other people. But it seems like respect is a one-way street, or has been for many years now.
Yeah, and it's always the one-way street, and a lot of it does boil down to, I know it's like a weird turn of phrase, but you know, they call it the cult of personality, and I don't like the word cult because it has a very, I don't want to say ambiguous, but people define it in different ways. But there are times when a forgiveness is extended to a person because of their status. There's an idea of, well, that guy used to work for Image, or he used to work for DC, or he used to work for Marvel, so let's cut him some slack. Like, that book's coming, guys, and it's going to be great. Never mind the fact that these are people who had to make deadlines as part of their career for however long, so they should know better. They should know that on their own time, that in a way, they should be the masters at keeping time because they had to do it for so long. But I've seen time and time again, a lot of our friends who are independent, like truly independent, who have not worked in the mainstream, they're not granted that forgiveness at all for lateness. So there is a degree of double standard going on there, or hypocrisy, that I don't think is fair. And that's why it's very important for us at Iconic. We really prize early to on-time delivery, preferably early, and we stress it a lot. Doug and I have had several conversations this week, too many to mention, on the phone with printers and manufacturers. And there have been a lot of very heated conversations that all revolved around deadlines. We have to make sure the books are printed. We have to make sure they ship. We have to make sure they get it here on time. And on some hand, some of the people that we interact with they don't understand the importance of it. And I tell them two reasons. One, our readers are valuable. They have already come to expect that Iconic is synonymous with an on-time or early delivery. We want to make sure to uphold that. That's a standard, a gold standard that we're proud of. Two, there are people, there are hawks around who are waiting for us to screw up. They're waiting for the opportunity to do a video talking about how we goofed. And that is going to come at some point, because we're human. We're very fallible. We're prone to error. There is going to be at some point a slip up or a delay. But I want to make sure that there's enough good faith with the readers over years of doing this, so that we are granted the benefit of the doubt when we're late. I don't think it's fair because, for example, there was a guy the other day he was getting onto Alejandro, and this guy was from Australia, and he's like, "Oh, mate, where's my book? Long Harbor's late." And I think he was like asking you about it. And then I noticed that he kept on tweeting another creator, a very big creator, whose book is like 7 months late. And his prior book was really late too. So I'm like, wait a minute. You're here shilling this guy's book who is late, like ubiquitously, unanimously late on his second go around. Actually, it's his third if you include a book that was supposed to come out in December. You're giving him the benefit of the doubt and not chastising him. And meanwhile, you want to get onto Alejandro, a guy who has never made a comic before, because he's late. That's not fair. And I think the only reason he's doing it is because he's part of Iconic. And he knows that that blemish that goes to Iconic can torpedo us, because all it would take is for one of those big YouTubers to talk about it and essentially try to besmirch our reputation. But it's hard, considering that our track record of fulfillment and quality is good. I would say that I don't think we're at Brian Polito level of efficiency yet, but then again, he's had more than 10 years of experience ahead of us, but we would like to get there at some point. So the best that we can do is our bare minimum, which is what we've talked about, the principles of a good quality book, storytelling that is more than mediocre, that passes muster, passing the savings on to the customer, good presentation, good customer service, getting them out on time. This is the bare minimum that I think any reader in independent comics should suspect, and give them the peace of mind of being able to support us. And for people listening out there, as we go into the Christmas season, I want you to know that we're very fortunate, and we're very happy that you have done this, because it's hard. It is really hard to do it when you don't have the name recognition that some of our competitors do.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where we're in a position where we're trying to live up to the ideals that we stated over the years. So what happens when you have people online who are trying to create narratives out of thin air? Like you mentioned, the Long Harbor shipping to Australia, which you literally couldn't even ship to Australia because of the pandemic. Or if you wanted to ship, it would be so cost prohibitive that they would be paying $150 or more to get it there. And so how do you be professional to people where you know what they're doing? You know that they're trying to create a narrative or get the ball rolling in a negative direction because any number of reasons. And that's just been another challenge where you don't want to be trying to swat at flies all over the place. But at the same time, if a narrative starts to take hold and it's not true, it could definitely affect your business. And it takes time out of your day to try and let people know the facts.
Yeah, especially when, I mean, some of them are just blatantly not true. And one of the things that, as I said, that you, me, Mark, that we've done is we just put our heads down and work. If we're privy to any drama, it's because the drama has come to us by way of like a private message or something, but we don't engage in any of it. I mean, like earlier this year, there were some people who were upset with me because they said, well, like, I see that you're still friends with this person. How could you after what they did? And I was like in the hospital, like during that time. I mean, this is honestly like a very trivial matter. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it might be important to you because you're going through it. But from my perspective, I would have to go through, I don't know, hours of streams of back and forth to kind of find out who said what, who did this. And I mean, the only thing I can say is that between the two of you, I'm friends, but this is one of those things where, because I'm kind of an outside spectator, I just have to kind of watch and see. And I think there are things that I might be suspicious of, but currently, I mean, this other party isn't even doing anything that I know of. They're not spreading anything to me or saying anything that I think is contrary to what I think. And so just in general, we just have a tendency to sit back and let some of this stuff happen. And at this point, it gets kind of amusing. But sometimes when we are part of it in a way that's very, that's definitely like lying and things that we're not involved with, and it's disingenuous, then it does irk me. And going back to kind of what happened in the last few days, it was something that we had predicted. In fact, the conversation that I had with Eric and with you was, I said, there's going to come a point where our success is going to be to the point where it's going to be like the elephant in the room, or the flamingo that has to bury its head, or the pelican or whatever has the flamingo puts its head into sand to ignore it. And these are things that we had talked about with Eric. And sure enough, because I think Eric, they equate him as being part of the group because he's so friendly. They do things like they say, this is a great thing. Like, hey, thanks, Eric. Like, ignore the box, ignore all the other stuff. Granted, some of that might be by accident. And so obviously I don't want to besmirch anyone who has done something similar, because obviously if what you bought was Arcathena, that's what you want to take a photo of. But it's just the fact that I predicted it. And I said, like, this is going to happen. And he was like, what, really? And I said, yes. And the reason why is because we're persona non grata in a lot of groups, but they're going to like you. And they're going to like you because you're a pro. And to them, the pro status means a lot. So they're going to want to support you, but they're going to want to conveniently ignore what we've done. I mean,
it gets tricky because there's the readers who usually I could tell, like, okay, they don't know, they might be new. They're just saying whatever. And I'm just happy that they're even supporting my books or your books or whatever. But then there's the YouTubers, and then there's like the creators who are the artists, or maybe like a cross-pollination of both. And typically it's like when you see the YouTubers, they're in the know. And so sometimes it's like you have to ignore those sorts of things where people say, like, this has never been done before. And you're like, actually, it has been done before in the past. And also recently it was done by Timothy Lim and Mark Pellegrini and myself. But you're conveniently ignoring that. And so, we typically sort of just roll our eyes at a lot of that stuff. But again, it's one of those things where that's where narratives are created, that, so-and-so is the first person to do this in, a decade in indie comics ever. And you're just like, it's literally like my book had gilded pages. Yeah. Like, what are you talking about?
I know. And the funny thing was, like, for example, for Arcathena, there was a stream that Eric was on, and he and I kind of had laugh about this afterwards, because I was like, man, I told you this was going to happen. Basically, the host was like, oh my gosh, look at this Arcathena. How many pages is it? Wow, it's hardback. That's crazy. Like, it has all these bells and whistles, like this presentation. This is the gold standard, guys. This is how you do it. This is the gold standard of crowdfunded independent comics. Let's scroll down here. Oh, look, Arcathena in Common America. Okay, let's scroll down here. And then he's like, yeah, I don't want to skip over that. Like, it's done by Iconic Comics. And the guy's like, yeah, that's Doug Ernst and them. Yeah, they do a good job. Okay, let's keep on going. And I was like,
it's got the full story in color, and then it's got just the story, the black and white inks. Holy cow! Like,
and I thought, I was like, wait a minute. So you're saying Arcathena is the gold standard, but he said that he uses a lot. He's inspired by a lot of our playbook. And I'm like, honestly, the hardback idea wasn't even mine. It was Doug Ernst's. He's the one who surprised me, because on Black Tide, you did the whole thing in hardcover. And I was like, wait a minute. Doug is like upping the game. I got to catch up. Like, we got to do hardcover too. Let's raise our standard here, because we got to make sure that we're all on, we're going to hold ourselves up to this. So we're all playing by the same playbook. But I thought, okay, so you're aware of us, because it's not like you scrolled down to Iconic Comics and Doug Ernst and said, wait, what is this? Who is this person? Like, what do they do? I think that's one thing. But to say that, Arcathena is the gold standard, don't get me wrong, Eric, your book is beautiful. I have seen it in person. But I think it was very disingenuous for this guy. And I think he was kind of caught red-handed, where it's like, guy, I know what you're doing. Like, you want to attribute it to him because you think he's part of a group, but he's independent. I mean, we're all nice to people if they're nice to us. I really don't care who you are, what flag you fly, what group you're in. It's fine to me. It's very copacetic. But on the other hand, we just don't like the attribution of us to groups that honestly we're not welcome in, or that have actively said that they're not allowed to talk about. I don't think that's very fair to us.
Yeah, no, it's a constant minefield. And I don't know, at least for your viewers right now, I just hope they realize that we're trying our best to take the high road and be professional, even when there are things publicly and behind the scenes where people are trying to kneecap you.
Yeah, and we have a lot of things planned. Like I said, the year is not even over yet. So I know, Doug, the last 24 hours have been crazy, and I think you actually might have something of a surprise before the end of the year, quite literally. And that's something that if it happens, you're not going to reveal until pretty much it happens. And then we have a major surprise that's going to be happening in either late January or early February. And it's another one of those things where it's going to be, we're not mentioning it, we're not saying anything, but it's going to happen faster than you know it. And we're not going to tell anyone until it's practically about to happen so that we don't tip anyone off. So a lot of the successes that we're looking forward to, a lot of the things that we're planning step by step, again, it's not things that we want attributed to anyone else. These are business decisions that were made completely independent of other people. Pretty much the only people we network with are other Iconic Comics people and third-party companies and manufacturers who are thinking outside the box and providing us with ideas that are not coming from pros. I know I kind of speak harshly about them, mostly in jest, but there's a lot of truth to it. I almost never, ever go to pros for any advice because in the last 4.5 years, honestly, I don't think I've gleaned anything from them that I did not learn from looking outside the box and looking from outside the industry. And even you, Doug, I mean, I know you've been having your share of problems with some mainstream professionals as well. So I think the learning experience is that we do things very independently. We do things based on good business decisions. And for Iconic Comics, I mean, everything is done very autonomously, even though we all work together under the same imprint and the same umbrella.
Yeah, no, it's difficult. It's one of those things where be careful what I say here. It's when we were going through like the worst of times in terms of people trying to do the character assassination thing, there were lots of people that unfollowed us. And so it's even extra weird now when you see, you know, Iconic success building, and then all of those people that unfollowed you years ago when the worst things were being said about you that were lies slowly start following back again, and then like, hey buddy, how you doing, buddy, like that sort of thing. And that's another one of those things where people don't see it, and then so when your hard work is attributed to other people, it's hard not to like sort of grit your teeth a little bit.
It is, and we do pay some attention to that because, for example, there was a guy who Mark and I knew. We actually met this guy, and he seemed very friendly. So I don't want to say anything negative about him or his personality or anything like that. But during kind of a brouhaha that happened about 3.5 years ago, where Mark and I were like told, it kind of tied in with the whole conspiracy thing with you, and the guy like unfollowed us. And we just thought, oh, okay, well, I guess the whole thing I said about meeting someone in person sometimes doesn't matter to a lot of people. Here we are. And I think it was just a few months ago, he like refollowed us and wanted us to do like interviews with him. And so Mark and I just kind of privately said, this is the guy that basically like almost threw us under the bus. We're not, you know, we're forgiving, but that doesn't mean that we owe them time, especially when there's no olive branch or anything that that calls for it, simply because like we're not, that's not something that we have to do. And maybe that is a little bit of, I don't know what you'd call it, a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, but we're just a little bit more careful now with who we do business with and who we associate with. The people that we do work with at Iconic are all very professional. We've all spent lots of time together. There definitely is like a fraternal camaraderie that goes on there, and we like it. I mean, I know that people who look at your channel has seen the fun we had in Mobile, Alabama, just like 2 weeks ago, like hanging out at battleships and having dinner and just kind of telling jokes and stories and having a good time. We're very happy with the progress that we've made. We look forward to 2022. And for people out there who are curious, like I said, info@iconiccomics.com. That's essentially where you can try and submit something. Like I said, sometimes the owners will ask for our opinion or ask if we know the person, but ultimately we have no decision that's made in terms of who gets selected and who doesn't. But it's worth a shot, and we really do hope that the independent comics sector grows, simply because I think that as far as the mainstream is concerned, a lot of the good ideas are going to start coming out of outside sources. So we're very excited and looking forward to what we have to show you going into the new year.
Cool. I think, well, I just kind of said my piece, unless there's anything, people in the chat room have questions, or if there's anything else you want to say. But I think that clears up a lot on my end.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone has any questions, we're probably going to leave in about 2 minutes. I'm just going to go up real quick and see if there was anything that needed to be addressed. I actually haven't been paying attention to the chat, but let me see who's in here. There's kind of your regulars, which is cool. Oh, there's Mark. I didn't know Mark was in there. Hey, Mark. So hello. There's Alfonso Prouty. I don't think I've seen you in a while. There's Roscoe Coltrane. Hello. Robot Mechanic. Oh, Comic Book Hut is in here as well. 10-Cent Story Dad's Captain Cummings. Hello, hello. Oh, Captain Cummings, I forgot to tell you. I received that thing in the mail. I think it arrived maybe a few days ago, but it's been busy here at the house getting ready for the holidays and stuff. So I just recently opened it. So thank you very much. I'm gonna have to share it with Mark because I think he's gonna get a really big kick out of that. So I'll show to him and brag what you gave me as a Christmas gift. So thank you very much for that. Thomas Roy Loop is here too. Hello, hello. I think, did you have a birthday recently? If not, or if you did, happy birthday. There's Iron vs. Comics. It's Cody Fernandez with the Jack Irons title, which is really good. So if you haven't picked it up yet, you might want to check that out. It's Jack Irons. Jim Tuner, the algorithm, is here too. Jim Tuner always speaks the truth. Tehillim is here also. And then let's see here, going towards end. Paul's NYC. Hey, I think you got your books, didn't you? I think I saw you post them on Twitter. I hope you enjoy them. We're very happy seeing people finally getting those. I'm crossing my fingers, but I think the last of them are going out tomorrow. So just in the nick of time to get out at least before Christmas. Unfortunately, not by Christmas, but again, going into the new year, I think most people who filled out their surveys are going to be receiving theirs. So we're very happy seeing those people who are getting their books in, which is really cool. And then Bullet Ninja Haggleman, yeah. And then Fizz Chozo and John Hansen is here too. So for all of you who have been in here from the very beginning or decided to tune in later, we want to wish you a very Merry Christmas if we don't talk to you sooner. And as well as that, we want to wish you a Happy New Year. We've been very blessed this year, and I think I speak on behalf of Doug as well, that we are very happy with how the year has turned out. There are things that we achieved this year that we could have never, ever dreamed about at all, beyond our wildest imagination. And our goals for 2022 are very small steps, but I think they're very significant, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So I hope that you join us for what we have in store. I have Common America Volume 5 that's going to be coming out in January. At least the orders are. And I think Doug and Matt Weldon are wrapping up Soulfinder Black or Infinite Ascent, which is the 3rd volume. And I think he's trying to get that one ready for a March release. And then all of that is going to lead up and coincide to Black Ops X Common America X Soulfinder, which is going to be our major summer crossover. And as far as that's concerned, I've finished a little bit more than a 5th of the book already. So that one is almost done, and I anticipate I'm going to have it ready by, at this rate, maybe mid-February. Oh, Draw and Talk is here. Hey, how's it going? And ArcMark 88 as well. So, all right, everyone, I hope that you have a good night. I hope this clarifies a lot of things. Thank you for sticking with Iconic. Thank you for a lot of the input and the feedback that we've received. We really appreciate it. Doug, I guess we're going to be signing off unless you have anything else that you want to add to that.
No, man, I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and thanks to everyone who's tuning in, Tillium and others, people that back the books, Paul's NYC, pretty much everyone. I appreciate the support, and Tim, as always, it's been a great year working with you in various capacities, and I can't wait for 2022 with you and Mark and everybody else at Iconic Comics.
Absolutely, and we have a lot of really cool things that we're going to announce here sooner than you think. So everyone have a good night. Have a Merry Christmas. God bless you all. Bye-bye.